Let's build a solar greenhouse. Welcome to the self-sufficient backyard for the independent homesteader. You're looking at the solar greenhouse that we built. Solar greenhouses differ from conventional greenhouses in that they are designed to both collect and retain heat, thus making them a much more versatile type of greenhouse as compared to the conventional hoop tunnel greenhouses. There are several design parameters for solar greenhouses. 3 of them are: number 1, the north wall should be solid and insulated. Some even say the east and west wall should be insulated too, although ours are not. Number 2, the foundation is insulated to about 1 foot down into the ground. You'd be amazed how much difference this makes. And number 3, the south wall has glazing and should have 2 layers of it. Our greenhouse will be attached to the south side of our house. Like solar panels, a solar greenhouse must face south. By attaching the greenhouse to the south side of the house, the south wall of the house becomes the north wall of the greenhouse, making the north wall already built and insulated. This saves work and expense as this one wall serves 2 purposes. Using string to mark the perimeter, now we can begin digging out the foundation. For the foundation, we're using leftover pieces of ICF, insulated concrete forms, left over from the house construction. Not only is this a good use for the leftover pieces, but the forms have built-in insulation from the 2.5-inch foam on their outer sides. You can see we even had some leftover corner pieces and were able to use them. So we're putting the forms, the ICF, into the foundation trench that we dug. Once the ICF is in the trench and it's all lined up and level, we can backfill the trench using a shovel on both the outside of the greenhouse and on the inside. We enlisted some help from friends to help mix the concrete to fill the forms.
Here I am, I'm setting the anchor bolts and smoothing the concrete as I go along. This is an accurate way to use a speed square to locate drill holes to anchor the 2x10 plates down. And this is a closer view. I'm using the actual bolt and the square for best accuracy. All bottom plates are now installed and they're fastened with large washers and nuts. Temporarily, I'm anchoring the header to the house. Note that the 2x6 header was notched at every rib of the exterior sheathing. I'm drilling through holes to locate my anchor bolts. Those masonry anchor bolts need to be seated deep into the concrete wall of the house. And that was a brutal job with a hammer drill and a concrete bit. Each of these anchor bolts will need to be pounded home with the sledgehammer. If I just pounded the bolt in, I'd destroy the threads and never be able to get the nut on. So I'm using a threaded coupler, which engages a lot of threads. That way, there's less chance of damaging the threads when I pound the anchor bolts in. And I'm using a small sledgehammer to pound those anchor bolts into the concrete house wall.
Now we need to build the arches that will support the glazing. Ron set up a jig made of 2x10s set atop sawhorses. The jig made sure all pieces were bent to the proper curvature so all were uniform. Take note of the head protection. During the bending process, the strips were under much tension, in fact many broke, so protective gear prevented head and/or eye damage. Here you can see the actual jig setup that uses scrap pieces of 2x4 as guides for bending to the proper shape. Here's a close-up of the jig corner. You can see how the notched 2x4 scrap securely holds the ends of the arched pieces. The arches are made of two pieces of 1x3 with a spacer in between for added support, and which will allow us to slide in horizontal cross bracing, as you'll see later. To assemble the arches, Ron uses wood glue to glue in the spacers. He just uses an old paintbrush to apply the glue. Then clamps are put on to temporarily hold everything in place. Once everything is clamped together, wood screws are put in to hold it all together and the clamps are removed. To make the 1x3s more pliable for bending, we arranged a steaming setup using a cast iron tea kettle filled with water set on our Coleman camp stove. Piping was attached to the spout of the teapot. Then the 1x3 boards you see piled to the left were put into the steam-filled pipe. At most, 2 pieces fit in at a time. We brought out one at a time and replaced it with one from the pile. Here are some completed arches. We put some temporary bracing on the bottom of each one to help hold the shape and relieve some of the strain and stress from being bent until they were installed.
I've mortised the slot in the bottom plate to accommodate the bottom of the arch. Metal connectors screwed to the arch side and bottom plate will fasten them down permanently. Now we can start attaching the arches, and you can start to see the shape our solar greenhouse is going to take. This is how the arches were attached to the header using metal brackets and screws.
You can see it's really taking shape now. As we're installing the arches, we're also inserting the horizontal 1x3 cross bracing through the gap we created when we built the arches. Hence the spacer you saw earlier in between the two 1x3. Here you can see the arches are completely installed, including all the horizontal pieces. The 1x3 horizontal bracing was screwed into each arch. The horizontal 1x3 give much strength and stability to the framework, so much so that our solar greenhouse has withstood hurricanes. Once the arches and horizontal pieces are installed, we added another 1x3 on top of each arch. Clamps were used to hold the 1x3 as we gradually bent it into position. Then it was secured permanently with screws. Here, Ron's sanding with a palm sander to remove any rough edges that might abrade the glazing. The glazing manufacturer suggested adding this plastic strip prior to attaching the glazing, so that's what we did. We just used a staple gun to attach the plastic strip. The solar greenhouse framework is now complete and ready to attach the glazing. For the outer glazing, we're using a super tough material that comes on a roll and is made from woven poly. To secure the glazing, we're using lath strips that are screwed into each arch. It's important that the glazing material be stretched as taut as possible as we work our way across. Finally, we're almost done. Here's the completed front wall, the south wall of the solar greenhouse. Looks like a good construction so far. Ron's framing up the east end using 2x4. This side will have the access door, hence the doorway you see. This side will be covered with glazing like the front. The opposite end, the west end, is framed up the same way as the east end, except there's no door. This side will also be covered with glazing, but this end will have a removable vent at the top for ventilation. Otherwise, the greenhouse will overheat. Ventilation is critical.
Inside the greenhouse, we're using string to denote the location of the growing beds. We dig out the good soil on the walkway and add it to the beds. No point in wasting good soil in the pathway. To hold the soil in place, I'm using 2x10, which is set on their edge to frame the beds. Rebar is pounded in on the outside, which holds the 2x10 in place. There's no need to put any on the inside, as the soil will hold the 2x10 upright. On the inside, we attach greenhouse plastic as the second layer of glazing, using lath strips. Greenhouse plastic has been UV stabilized to increase its life expectancy. The airspace between the two layers acts as an insulating layer, one of the key differences between a conventional greenhouse and a solar greenhouse.
We use the solar greenhouse year-round. In spring, it's full of seedlings waiting to be transplanted to the outdoor garden. In summer, it's full of tomatoes and sweet potatoes. And in the fall and winter, we can store cold-tolerant vegetables such as mature cabbages and Brussels sprouts and grow lettuce, spinach, endive, and broccoli. Thanks for watching. Use the comments for any questions. See you next time.